My stepmother stole my dead mother's fortune, so I spent 10 years destroying her life piece by piece. When Mom died in that car accident, I was only 17 and Dad was completely broken. We had no idea that Victoria Martinez, the grief counselor, who showed up at our door 2 weeks later, was actually a predator hunting for her next victim. Victoria appeared like an angel of mercy. She brought casseroles, helped with funeral arrangements, and listened to Dad cry for hours about losing his soulmate. "I specialize in helping families through sudden loss," she told us with tears in her eyes. "I lost my own husband in a car accident, so I understand your pain." I was grateful someone was taking care of Dad while I tried to hold myself together. Mom had built a successful bakery chain called Sweet Dreams, and her life insurance was worth $2 million. Everything was supposed to go to me when I turned 21, with Dad as the trustee. Victoria seemed so caring, always asking about our financial stress and offering to help with paperwork. I should have known she was studying us like a hunter studies prey. Dad was too destroyed to think clearly, and I was just a grieving teenager who wanted someone to make the pain stop. Victoria moved fast. Within 3 months of Mom's death, she had convinced Dad that grief was making him sick and he needed professional support. She started staying overnight to monitor his health. By month 4, she was living with us full-time. "Your father is having panic attacks," she explained to me. "He needs constant care right now." Dad seemed grateful for her attention. Victoria would make his favorite meals, massage his shoulders, and tell him how strong and handsome he was. She erased Mom's presence slowly and carefully. "These photos are triggering your father's depression," she would say, packing away Mom's pictures. "We need to help him heal." 6 months after Mom died, Dad announced that he and Victoria were engaged. I was shocked. "Dad, you barely know her," I protested, "and it's too soon. What would Mom think?" Dad got angry, which was unlike him. "Your mother is gone, Maya. Victoria is helping me live again. I thought you'd be happy that I'm not crying every day anymore." Victoria stood behind him, rubbing his shoulders and giving me a look that made my skin crawl. That's when I realized she had been poisoning his mind against me while playing the perfect caregiver. They got married 8 months after Mom's death, in a small ceremony that felt like a betrayal of everything my parents had shared. Victoria wore white, which seemed wrong for a woman marrying a widower. She invited her friends but told Dad that a big wedding would be too emotional for him. I was the only family member there, watching this stranger become my stepmother. During the reception, Victoria's friends kept complimenting her on landing such a successful man so quickly. One of them whispered, "You always know how to spot the vulnerable ones." I tried to tell Dad what I had overheard, but he dismissed my concerns. "Victoria loves me, Maya. I know it's hard to accept, but she's part of our family now." Victoria was smart about gaining legal access to our lives. She convinced Dad to add her name to his bank accounts in case of emergency. She suggested he update his will to protect his new wife. She slowly isolated him from his old friends, claiming they were stuck in the past and preventing his healing. Within a year of Mom's death, Victoria controlled everything. She had convinced Dad to sell Mom's bakery chain to reduce his stress. The $4 million went straight into accounts that Victoria could access. I watched Victoria systematically destroy my father's health and happiness. She convinced him to quit his job as an engineer because work stress was bad for his heart. She controlled his diet, his medications, and his social interactions. Dad, who had been strong and active before Mom died, became weak and confused. He started having memory problems and complained about feeling tired all the time. "It's just the grief," Victoria would say. "He needs more rest." But I noticed Victoria giving him pills that weren't prescribed by his doctor. When I asked about them, she said they were natural supplements to help with depression. Dad became so dependent on Victoria that he couldn't make simple decisions without her approval. She convinced him that I was rebellious and angry about the marriage. Slowly, Dad and I grew apart. Victoria would tell him that I had said hurtful things I never said. She would cry and claim I was making her feel unwelcome in her own home. Dad started defending Victoria instead of listening to me. By my senior year of high school, I felt like I had lost both parents. Mom was dead, and Dad had become a stranger controlled by a woman who was clearly manipulating him for money. 18 months after Mom's death, Dad had a massive heart attack. He was only 45 years old and had been healthy before Victoria entered our lives. I rushed to the hospital, but Victoria was already there, playing the devastated wife perfectly. He complained about chest pains this morning, she sobbed to the doctors. I should have made him go to the emergency room sooner. Dad died within hours. As he lay unconscious in the ICU, Victoria whispered in my ear, "I hope you know how much your father loved you despite your difficult behavior." Even in that moment, she was manipulating the situation to make me feel guilty. After Dad's funeral, Victoria's mask started to slip. "I'm sorry, Maya," she said, sitting across from me in the lawyer's office just 1 week later. "There's been a change with your inheritance." The lawyer, Mr. Rodriguez, looked uncomfortable as he explained that Dad had updated his will 6 months before his death. Everything now went to Victoria as his surviving spouse. My college fund, Mom's life insurance money, the proceeds from selling her business, all of it belonged to Victoria now. "Your father wanted to make sure his wife was taken care of," Mr. Rodriguez explained. I felt the room spinning. "But Mom's will left everything to me." "I'm afraid your stepmother is correct," Mr. Rodriguez said, showing me legal documents. "When your father inherited your mother's estate, it became his property to distribute as he chose. His will now leaves everything to his wife." I stared at the papers in disbelief. Dad's signature looked shaky and uncertain, nothing like his usual confident handwriting. "This doesn't look like Dad's signature," I protested. Victoria reached over and patted my hand like I was a child. "Grief makes people see things that aren't there, sweetheart. Your father was very clear about his wishes. I was 17 years old with no money for lawyers and no family left to help me. Victoria moved me into the guest room of what used to be my house. She redecorated everything in stark black and white, erasing every trace of my parents' warm, colorful home. "You need to focus on your future," Victoria told me. "I've enrolled you in public school. Private school is too expensive now." She had control of over $6 million, Mom's life insurance, the bakery sale money, and Dad's savings. Meanwhile, she gave me an allowance of $50 a week and acted like she was being generous. Victoria threw parties where her friends marveled at her good fortune. I heard them talking one night about how quickly she had secured her position in our family. Victoria made my senior year of high school a nightmare. She monitored my phone calls and told my friends' parents that I was having behavioral problems after losing both parents. She spread rumors that I blamed her for Dad's death and was unstable with grief. Slowly, my friends stopped inviting me places, and my teachers started treating me like a troubled kid. I felt completely alone and powerless. But during those dark months, something was growing inside me. It wasn't just anger, though I had plenty of that. It was determination. Every night, I studied the business records Mom had kept in a fireproof safe that Victoria didn't know existed. Mom had taught me to always keep backup copies of important documents. "Trust but verify, Maya," Mom used to say. "Always protect yourself in business." I found copies of Mom's original will, which clearly stated that her assets should go to me, not to any future spouse Dad might marry. I also discovered Dad's original will from before he met Victoria, which left everything to me as well. The handwriting on Dad's new will looked nothing like his real signature. I started planning my revenge carefully, studying business law books and researching inheritance fraud cases. On my 18th birthday, Victoria threw me a party that was really just an excuse to show off to her friends. She bought me a cheap bracelet and acted like the most generous stepmother in the world. "Maya is so lucky to have me," she told everyone. "I've sacrificed so much to raise her after losing her father." I smiled and played along, but inside I was counting the days until I could escape. That night, Victoria came to my room with legal papers. "I need you to sign these before you graduate," she said. "They're just forms for college financial aid and insurance." I looked at the documents carefully. Hidden among normal forms was a paper that would have given Victoria permanent guardianship over me, even as an adult. Another document would have made me responsible for debts that Victoria had created in Dad's name. I pretended to sign everything, but I actually forged fake signatures that looked real but weren't legally binding. Victoria was so confident in her control over me that she didn't even check my work. The next morning, I packed a small bag and left for college early. I had earned a full scholarship to study business and law at Northwestern University. Victoria thought I was going to the local community college, but I was actually escaping to build myself into someone strong enough to fight back. College became my training ground for revenge. I threw myself into studying business law, inheritance fraud, and criminal investigation. My professors were impressed by my focus and maturity. Most freshmen are homesick and partying, Professor Kim told me. You study like you're preparing for war. If only she knew that I really was preparing for war. I worked 3 part-time jobs to pay for food and expenses while my scholarship covered tuition. Victoria never sent me a penny, even though she was living in luxury off my parents' money. Every dollar I earned went into a special account I called my Justice Fund. I also spent my free time investigating Victoria's background, but it was frustrating work. Her past was carefully hidden. I could find marriage records, but getting details about her previous husband's deaths required more resources than I had. Public records only told part of the story. I needed help from professionals, but good private investigators were expensive. After my freshman year, I had saved $3,000, which wasn't nearly enough for the kind of investigation I needed. My justice fund grew slowly, while Victoria lived lavishly off my parents' money. It was maddening to know she was getting away with murder while I scraped together quarters for laundry. By my sophomore year, I had finally saved enough money to hire a private investigator. Marcus Thompson was a former police detective who specialized in cold cases. When I told him my story, he was skeptical at first. A lot of people think their relatives were murdered when they die of natural causes, he said. Grief makes people see conspiracies everywhere. But when I showed him the evidence I had gathered, his attitude changed completely. This handwriting comparison is compelling, he admitted, studying Dad's real signature versus the will. And you're right about her pattern of targeting widowers. Marcus agreed to investigate Victoria's background for $5,000, which wiped out most of my savings. The investigation took months and hit several dead ends. Victoria had been careful to cover her tracks. Her first husband's death records were missing from the county courthouse. Her second husband had been cremated, eliminating the possibility of toxicology testing. We couldn't find witnesses who remembered details from decades ago. For a while, I thought Marcus was going to tell me there wasn't enough evidence to pursue the case. I was devastated by the possibility that Victoria might actually get away with murdering my family. But then, Marcus made a breakthrough that changed everything. I found something, Marcus told me during our meeting in his cramped office. Victoria made one crucial mistake 20 years ago. He showed me a police report from her first husband's death. The responding officer had noted that Victoria seemed unusually calm for a new widow and had asked detailed questions about life insurance before the body was even removed from the house. More importantly, the officer had collected samples of medications found in the house, including some that weren't prescribed to the deceased husband. These samples have been sitting in evidence storage for 2 decades, Marcus explained. If we can get them tested, we might find digitalis or other poisons. But getting access to old evidence wasn't simple. We needed a court order, which required convincing a judge that there was probable cause to suspect murder. Our first attempt was rejected. The judge said there wasn't enough evidence to justify reopening a case from 1995. I was crushed. I had spent months and thousands of dollars, and we were still nowhere close to proving Victoria's crimes. Marcus tried to encourage me, but I could see the doubt in his eyes. Maybe we need to approach this differently, he suggested. Instead of trying to prove the old murders, let's focus on preventing the next one. Marcus's new strategy was to monitor Victoria and catch her in the act of planning another murder. We discovered that she had joined a grief support group and was targeting a recently widowed doctor named James Mitchell. Dr. Mitchell was wealthy, lonely, and exactly the type of vulnerable man Victoria preferred. Marcus set up surveillance, but it was expensive and time-consuming. I was working 4 jobs now to pay for the investigation while trying to maintain my grades. I was exhausted and stressed, barely sleeping 3 hours a night. Several times, I considered giving up. The case seemed impossible, and Victoria was too smart to make obvious mistakes. Then I had a breakthrough that came from an unexpected source. During one of my jobs cleaning office buildings at night, I overheard two women talking about estate planning. One mentioned how easy it was to forge documents if you knew the right people. "My sister works at a law firm that specializes in flexible documentation," she said with a laugh. I followed up on this lead and discovered an underground network of corrupt lawyers and notaries who specialized in creating fake wills and estate documents. This was how Victoria had been operating. She didn't work alone. She had a whole team of accomplices. Tracking down Victoria's accomplices was like solving a puzzle with missing pieces. The corrupt lawyers were careful about their clients and didn't keep obvious records of illegal activities. I spent months trying to infiltrate their network, pretending to be a desperate college student who needed help with financial problems. It was dangerous work. These people were criminals who wouldn't hesitate to hurt someone who threatened their operation. I had several close calls where I had to make quick excuses and disappear before they became suspicious. Marcus was worried about my amateur detective work. "You're not trained for undercover operations," he warned. "If these people figure out who you really are, they could make you disappear." But I was desperate. We were running out of time and money. Victoria was getting closer to Dr. Mitchell, and I couldn't bear the thought of her murdering another innocent person. Finally, I got lucky. One of the corrupt notaries, a man named Eddie Santos, was arrested for unrelated fraud charges. When the police searched his office, they found records going back years. Hidden in those records were documents linking him to Victoria and proving that he had helped her forge Dad's will. Marcus used his police contacts to get access to the evidence. For the first time in 4 years, we had solid proof of Victoria's crimes. Everything was ready by late summer of my senior year. We had forensic evidence from Eddie Santos's files proving the forged will. We had testimony from Dr. Mitchell confirming that Victoria had been pressuring him to change his estate planning. We had financial records showing payments from Victoria to various accomplices over the years. But I still wanted more. Marcus warned me that we might never get perfect evidence. "Criminal cases are built on the evidence you have, not the evidence you wish you had," he said. "We have enough to file charges and let the prosecutors take over." I was reluctant to move forward because I knew we would only get one chance. If Victoria beat the case, she would disappear and never be caught. After weeks of agonizing over the decision, I finally agreed to proceed. Rebecca Walsh, the prosecutor Marcus had contacted, reviewed our evidence and agreed to file charges. "This is a strong case," she said, "but I want you to understand that prosecuting old murders is never easy. Victoria's lawyers will claim the evidence is too old and unreliable." The night before we filed charges, I called Victoria for what I hoped would be our final conversation. "Hi, Victoria. I just wanted to thank you for everything you've done for me over the years." My voice was steady, but my heart was pounding. Friday morning arrived like a storm I had been preparing for my entire adult life. At exactly 9 a.m., police officers knocked on Victoria's door with warrants for her arrest on charges of fraud, forgery, and conspiracy to commit murder. At the same time, federal marshals served her with court orders freezing her bank accounts and seizing assets bought with stolen money. I watched from across the street as Victoria was led away in handcuffs, her face shocked and confused. She kept asking, "What is this about? I haven't done anything wrong." The local news crews arrived within an hour because Rebecca had tipped them off about the arrest. Victoria's photo was on every channel by evening. "Local woman arrested in inheritance fraud case," the headlines read. Her wealthy friends saw the news and immediately distanced themselves. The country club where she played tennis revoked her membership. The expensive restaurants where she dined refused to serve her when she made bail. But I knew this was just the beginning. Victoria had expensive lawyers and would fight the charges with everything she had. The real battle was just starting, and there was no guarantee we would win. The legal proceedings were more complicated than I had expected. Victoria's lawyers immediately challenged the evidence, claiming it was too old to be reliable. They argued that Eddie Santos was a criminal who couldn't be trusted, and that the forged documents could have been created by anyone. The judge agreed to suppress some of our evidence, ruling that the chain of custody was questionable for documents that were decades old. I was devastated. We had spent years building this case, and now it was falling apart in court. Rebecca tried to reassure me, but I could see the concern in her eyes. "We still have enough evidence to proceed," she said, "but the case just got much harder to win." Victoria's defense team was led by a famous criminal lawyer named Martin Cross, who specialized in getting wealthy clients acquitted of serious crimes. Cross immediately went on the offensive, claiming that I was a vindictive stepdaughter who had fabricated evidence to steal Victoria's inheritance. He painted me as an unstable young woman, consumed by greed and resentment. "Miss Patterson has spent years plotting against my client," Cross told reporters. "This is a malicious prosecution based on lies and forged evidence." The media started to turn against me. Some news outlets ran stories questioning whether I was the real villain in the case. The trial began in my final semester of law school. I had to take a leave of absence to focus completely on the case. Victoria's lawyers had done an effective job of damaging my credibility before the trial even started. Several potential witnesses refused to testify, claiming they were afraid of being dragged into a family feud. Others had changed their stories or suddenly couldn't remember important details. Cross was a master at creating reasonable doubt. He brought in handwriting experts who contradicted our analysis of the forged will. He found doctors who testified that Dad could have died of natural causes, despite the suspicious circumstances. He even located people who claimed Victoria was a devoted wife who genuinely loved my father. I watched from the courtroom as our carefully built case was systematically attacked and undermined. Rebecca fought back hard, but Cross was simply better at courtroom theater. When I testified about Victoria's crimes, Cross made me look like an angry child making up stories. "Isn't it true that you resented your stepmother from the moment she married your father?" he asked. "Isn't it true that you've been planning this revenge plot since you were a teenager?" His questions were designed to make me lose my temper, and several times I came close to breaking down on the witness stand. The jury deliberated for 3 days, which felt like 3 years. I barely slept or ate while waiting for their decision. When they finally returned to the courtroom, I could tell from their faces that the news wasn't good. They found Victoria guilty of fraud and conspiracy, but they couldn't reach a unanimous verdict on the more serious charges. The judge declared a mistrial on the murder conspiracy charges. Victoria was sentenced to only 5 years in prison for the fraud conviction. She would be eligible for parole in less than 3 years. I was crushed. After everything we had been through, Victoria was going to serve a minimal sentence and probably be released while she was still young enough to kill again. Rebecca tried to put a positive spin on the outcome. "We proved she was a criminal," she said. "That's more than most families get in cases like this." But it didn't feel like justice. Victoria had murdered my parents and stolen millions of dollars, and she was only getting 5 years in prison. I had hoped for life without parole, but instead she would be free before her 60th birthday. The civil case was still pending, which meant I might recover some of the stolen money. But that seemed like a small consolation prize compared to what Victoria deserved. The civil trial began 6 months later, and I was determined to get better results than in the criminal case. Civil cases have a lower burden of proof. We only needed to show that Victoria was probably guilty, not prove it beyond a reasonable doubt. Rebecca had moved to a private law firm and agreed to represent me in the civil case. We were able to use evidence that had been excluded from the criminal trial, and we didn't have to worry about the same strict rules that had hampered the prosecution. Victoria's legal bills had depleted most of her remaining assets, so she couldn't afford Martin Cross for the civil case. Her new lawyer was competent but not nearly as skilled at manipulating juries. The civil trial took 2 months, and this time our evidence was more compelling to the jury. They found Victoria liable for fraud and wrongful death, ordering her to pay me $8 million in damages. But there was a problem. Victoria didn't have $8 million anymore. Her legal bills, combined with assets that had been seized by the government, left her nearly bankrupt. I would be lucky to recover $2 million from her. It was better than nothing, but it was far from the complete justice I had dreamed of for so many years. Victoria had managed to spend or hide most of the money she had stolen from my family. While Victoria served her prison sentence, I focused on rebuilding my life and career. I graduated from law school and passed the bar exam on my first try. Rebecca offered me a position at her firm, specializing in inheritance fraud and elder abuse cases. The work was challenging and emotionally draining, but it felt like I was honoring my parents' memory by helping other families. My first major case involved an elderly man whose caregiver had stolen his life savings. We were able to recover most of the money and send the caregiver to prison for 10 years. Each victory felt like a small piece of justice for my own family. I also started the process of reclaiming my childhood home and rebuilding Mom's bakery business. Victoria had sold the house to pay her legal bills, but I was able to buy it back from the new owners. The Sweet Dreams bakery chain was harder to restore because the brand had been damaged by years of mismanagement. I decided to start over with a new name and concept, but the same recipes and values that Mom had built her business on. Progress was slow, but I was finally moving forward instead of just fighting the past. Victoria was released from prison after serving 3.5 years. I had hoped she would disappear quietly, but instead she gave interviews to local news stations claiming she had been wrongfully convicted. Maya Patterson destroyed my life with her lies, she told reporters. I loved her father, and I tried to take care of her after he died. This is how she repaid my kindness. Victoria's media campaign made me furious, but Rebecca advised me to ignore her. She's trying to bait you into a public fight, Rebecca explained. Don't give her the satisfaction of a response. Victoria moved to another state and seemed to be staying out of trouble, but I kept tabs on her through a private investigator. I wanted to make sure she wasn't targeting new victims. 2 years after her release, I received disturbing news. Victoria had remarried, this time to a wealthy retiree in Florida named Robert Hayes. Mr. Hayes was 73 years old, recently widowed, and worth over $5 million. The pattern was starting all over again. I knew I had to warn Mr. Hayes about Victoria's history, but I also knew he probably wouldn't believe me. Victoria was skilled at making her accusers look crazy and vindictive. I decided to take a different approach this time. Instead of trying to convince Mr. Hayes directly, I contacted his adult children and shared Victoria's criminal history with them. I provided court documents, news articles, and evidence of her pattern of targeting wealthy widowers. The Hayes family was initially skeptical, but they agreed to investigate Victoria's background themselves. What they found alarmed them enough to hire their own private investigator and lawyer. Within 6 months, they had gathered enough evidence to convince their father that Victoria was a dangerous predator. Mr. Hayes filed for divorce and obtained a restraining order against Victoria. She was forced to move out of his house and received nothing in the divorce settlement because of a prenuptial agreement his children had insisted on. Victoria's plan had been thwarted, and another potential victim had been saved. But I knew she would just find another target. Victoria was a serial predator who would never stop hunting vulnerable people. The only way to permanently stop her was to put her back in prison for the rest of her life. I started working with law enforcement in Florida to build a new case against Victoria, this time focusing on her attempted fraud against Mr. Hayes. Building a new criminal case against Victoria was even harder than the first time. She had learned from her previous mistakes and was being much more careful. She hadn't actually stolen any money from Mr. Hayes, so prosecutors were reluctant to file charges for attempted fraud. We need more than just suspicious behavior, the district attorney explained. We need evidence of actual crimes. I was frustrated by the legal system's limitations, but I understood the prosecutor's position. Victoria was cunning enough to stay just within the bounds of the law while still manipulating and deceiving people. I realized that criminal prosecution might not be the best way to stop her. Instead, I focused on warning her potential victims and making her activities public. I created a website documenting Victoria's criminal history and her pattern of targeting wealthy widowers. I contacted grief support groups and senior centers to warn them about predators like Victoria. I worked with other attorneys to develop better legal protections for vulnerable adults. The work was less dramatic than a criminal trial, but it was probably more effective at preventing future victims. Over the next 5 years, I helped expose several other inheritance fraudsters and probably saved dozens of families from financial devastation. 10 years after Victoria's first conviction, I received news that she had died of natural causes in a nursing home in Arizona. She was 69 years old and had been suffering from dementia for several years. Her death brought me a strange mix of emotions: relief that she could never hurt anyone again, sadness for the wasted life she had chosen, and a sense of closure that had been building for years. Victoria's obituary made no mention of her criminal history or the families she had destroyed. She was described as a devoted wife who had overcome many challenges in life. It was a final insult to her victims, but I decided not to fight it. Victoria was gone, and that was what mattered. I visited my parents' graves for the first time in years and told them that their killer was finally dead. I felt like I could finally let go of the anger and hatred that had driven me for so long. Victoria had stolen years of my life, but she hadn't destroyed me. I had built something meaningful from the ashes of my family's tragedy. The Patterson Foundation had helped over 300 families recover stolen inheritances. We had successfully lobbied for new laws protecting vulnerable adults from financial predators. Today, 15 years after Victoria first entered our lives as a fake grief counselor, I have built a life that would make my parents proud. I'm a successful attorney running a foundation that has helped hundreds of families. I've rebuilt Mom's bakery business into a small but thriving company with 12 locations. I live in my restored childhood home with my husband David, a fellow attorney who shares my passion for protecting vulnerable families. We have a 5-year-old daughter named Sarah, after my mother, and a 3-year-old son named James, after my father. My children will grow up knowing their grandparents' story and understanding why we fight for families in crisis. I still visit my parents' graves every year on the anniversary of their deaths. I tell them about the lives we've saved and the criminals we've stopped. I like to think they're proud of how I turned their tragedy into something that helps others. Victoria thought she could steal my future when she murdered my parents, but instead, she gave me a mission that has touched hundreds of lives. I didn't get perfect justice. Victoria died free instead of in prison. But I got something more important. I proved that evil doesn't always win, and that sometimes patience, intelligence, and determination can create meaning from tragedy. The Patterson family legacy lives on, stronger than ever, and Victoria's crimes will never be forgotten or repeated.